Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Jim Waltman. I'm the Executive Director of the Watershed Institute, and we're very pleased to have you joining us tonight to learn more about stormwater management, the DEP's new green infrastructure rules, and ways that you can work to strengthen and improve your stormwater ordinance in your municipality. We have a terrific sign up for tonight. Quite a few people have registered. We'll take just a couple of minutes before we get started to give people plenty of time to get on board. But thanks again for joining us. We'll get started in just a couple minutes.
As we wait for more people to join, if people could sort of raise their hand and let us know how many of you have heard of the new green infrastructure rule. It'll be interesting to see sort of the level of awareness.
Started in just a couple minutes. I have a couple minutes before 6. Still, thanks again for joining us tonight. It's a really important issue, particularly as we're facing up to the huge impact of climate change and what that's doing to our hydrology and our weather patterns. Dealing with the issue of stormwater management is, in New Jersey, perhaps the most important way we can prepare ourselves for the impacts that are still to come. We're delighted by the terrific sign up for this presentation tonight. And we have a great program from you. We have people signed up just about from all corners of the state of New Jersey, north, south, and yes, there is a central New Jersey. So thanks again for joining us. Just be a couple more minutes. Again, I'm Jim Waltman. I'm the Executive Director of the Watershed Institute. We have tonight as well Jennifer Coffey. She's the Executive Director of NJAC. And we're thrilled by our partnership with NJAC on tonight's program and so many other initiatives that we are working together on.
Thanks, Jim. We're thrilled too. It's great to be back together again. Jim and I worked together for a number of years.
That's right.
Way back when the Watershed Institute was called the Deep Inhale, the Stone Watershed Association. I swore I'd go to somewhere with a shorter name, and I failed at that.
And just so everyone knows, participants are automatically muted. If you have questions, there is a Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. Please use that. And we'll try to address as many questions as possible as things progress and towards the end of the presentation.
I wasn't looking at the weather today. Is it possible that it's not raining anywhere in the state of New Jersey today as we hold this webinar tonight?
It's pretty humid at Hamilton.
It is pretty humid.
Hasn't quite rained yet.
As we're waiting for some more participants, I'll ask another question. If you could raise your hand. How many of your towns are already working on a new stormwater ordinance in response to the green infrastructure rule? You just raise your hands or keep your hands raised. Be interested to see that. Good. Looks like a handful.
I have 6:02. Let's give it one more minute and then we'll get started. We have a good group already, and we're just, again, really pleased by the turnout tonight. We know this is not easy anytime that a municipality is required to update its ordinances, and on top of the issues that we're all facing together right now, it's certainly not any easier. And what we hope to do tonight is provide you some background information, some tools, and a pledge of support moving forward as you do the hard work of upgrading your stormwater ordinances. Again, my name is Jim Waltman. I'm the Executive Director of the Watershed Institute. We'll get started now. This webinar is being recorded, I believe, and we will send you a link when we're completed. So you'll have plenty of time to look back through it. I'm joined tonight, in addition to the speakers on our partner at ANJAC, by Sophie Glovier. Sophie joined our staff earlier this year. She's our municipal policy specialist, and she has spent a lot of time inside municipal buildings. She's chaired, I believe still currently chairs, the Environmental Commission in the town of Princeton. Sophie is going to help us tonight by gathering your questions from the Q&A box and posing those to our speakers. We have three terrific speakers tonight. Clay Emerson is Director of Stormwater Management and Green Infrastructure at Princeton Hydro. Mike Pissarro is the Policy Director here at the Watershed Institute. And David Cohen is Council President for the town of Princeton, and a survivor of an effort to upgrade and strengthen their municipal ordinance. Just a couple words about the Watershed Institute. We're focused on keeping water clean, safe, and healthy, working through conservation and advocacy, science, and education to protect and restore our water and natural environment. We have a multi-pronged strategy for doing that. We have a team of scientists who work to investigate and monitor water quality and environmental trends in our region. Advocacy for protection and restoration of water and watersheds. We have a strong policy team that works hand in glove with municipalities in our area of central New Jersey on issues like stormwater management. A robust environmental education program, some 350 programs a year that serve 10 to 12,000 kids. And modeling best stewardship practices. If you haven't had a chance to come out to our Watershed Reserve and Watershed Center near Pennington, I hope you will. It features quite a bit of green infrastructure. And there I set myself up. The Watershed Center was open to the public just 5 years ago. It's a LEED Platinum facility. It is surrounded by rain gardens, includes a green roof, rainwater harvesting, and a number of other strategies to conserve and manage water. It's also a great teaching platform for us as we work with municipalities and the private sector to improve stormwater management. We have a number of programs throughout the course of the year. I just want to queue up a couple that are a little bit in the future, but on February 4th and 5th, we'll be conducting our second annual Green Infrastructure Training and Certification program. This is designed for landscape professionals and public works staff, and it's a collaboration with a great group called the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professionals. This is a program that just recently reached out to us in interest of expanding beyond their scope, which obviously has been the Chesapeake Bay. And then later that month in February, we'll be providing a green infrastructure maintenance training program specifically for public works staff, and we'd love to have your town staff join us for that. Of course, our staff would welcome other opportunities to come and present to your municipalities if you believe that would be of help. We're located near Pennington, Hopewell Township and Mercer County, and we tend to focus in that part of the state. ANJAC is a great partner that does work across the state of New Jersey, and I'm sure they would welcome opportunities to come speak to your municipal bodies as well. I want to thank the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation and the William Penn Foundation for the support that they provide to our policy program, specifically the stormwater work. And I want to leave you just with a couple last thoughts. Again, we're going to manage the questions through the Q&A box. So if you're familiar with Zoom, you'll just click on that where it says Q&A and pop a question in there. And Sophie will be curating those questions. And again, please come visit us and enjoy our trails. Again, here's our three speakers. Clay is going to talk about the New Jersey DEP's Green Infrastructure Rule. Mike is going to lead you through recommendations for enhancing your stormwater management. And David will share his experience as a municipal official, now the council chair or council president in the town of Princeton. Now I'd love to turn it over to Jennifer Coffey, our partner in crime here, who's the executive director of ANJAC, to say a few words.
Great, thanks, Jim. You all have to forgive me. I don't have fancy slides like Jim does. I was scrolling through the participant list, and I cannot tell you how happy it makes my inner policy geek to see that we've got more than 200 people here tonight gathered to talk about improving stormwater management in New Jersey. And so this is the point in time where I wish I could see your faces, but maybe we can do a raise hand where I would ask, how many people have ever experienced a flood in their home or on their way to or from work? And I would expect that the majority of hands would shoot up, you know, if I could see you, and I'm sure I'll virtually see you in a moment. This is so incredibly important for us to focus on tonight. Before we lead into talking about the particulars, I want to give some kudos to the DEP for these new stormwater rules, and just say from the lead off, you know, there are so many environmental commissioners who are here tonight, and I hope that if you aren't already working on it, you will be working on a stormwater ordinance soon. The ordinance needs to be adopted and effective as of March 2nd. So that's really coming up pretty quickly in terms of the life of an ordinance and how one gets adopted. And so I know we're going to talk tonight about the requirements of that ordinance, but because good is never good enough for all of us, Mike has some recommendations on how to make that ordinance better. And it's been a real privilege to work with Mike and others on that ordinance so that we can, with all due respect to the DEP, go one better and start to deal with this newfangled thing called climate change and water quality impairments. We know that more than 90% of water in New Jersey is impaired for one reason or another. And so we can't keep discharging dirty water into already impaired water bodies and expecting it to get cleaner. So we can do a lot at the local level through environmental commissions and advising our council folk on what it is that they should be looking at so that we can get cleaner water, we can address climate change. I would like to encourage everybody to also go to anjac.org. I know we've got a lot of ANJAC folks here tonight. For those of you who are not, please visit anjac.org as well, and you can follow us on Facebook. It's a great resource for breaking environmental news. We do have our Environmental Congress coming up next month, and again, I do wish I could see all of your faces. We usually have 250 to 300 people who are gathered together, and we've got a bunch of sessions where we learn together and network. We're going to do our very best to recreate that virtually so that we can all be safe, and we'll be offering sessions throughout the month of October, so on Thursdays and on Fridays for the 5 weeks that October gives us. And we will be talking about more stormwater there, as well as a number of other issues that are facing New Jersey. So please do visit anjac.org, and you can register for Congress there. I know we've got a number of ANJAC staff as well on this evening. So they'll be paying attention to the questions, and it'll help inform the Congress and whatnot that's we're going to address there. And yes, I've got a reminder here just to remind everybody that this is being recorded. so that you can go back and watch it over and over again and share it with your municipal council members who sometimes need to hear it from the experts themselves. So with that, I will turn it over to Mike and Clay and David, and thank you so much for hosting this tonight.
All right, thank you, Jen. And it's been a pleasure working with you on the stormwater and adopting these new rules and hopefully getting it slightly better. So what we're going to talk about a little bit, as you mentioned, sort of the context of why green infrastructure rule came into place and why the Watershed Institute, ANJAC, and many others are arguing for even stronger protections than what the new rule provides. So I'm going to go right into that. So the water cycle, how the land treats water, how that circulates through our environment has changed from the natural, which is on the upper left, from the 40% gets utilized by plants, and most of that gets infiltrated into the ground. Very little of that runs off. And on the left-hand side, all the way down to the bottom, in an urban watershed where you have a high level of impervious cover, 75 to 100% impervious surface, where most of that, over half of that, runs off the land. And that has really real-world implications. And today, DEP just released with Rutgers an annual, not an annual, but a fairly regular land use change update, which indicated about a little over 30% of New Jersey has urbanized, has urban cover, and that means about that lower left-hand side. So in the 30% impervious surface, and that is a little different depending on where you are in New Jersey, but as a whole, 30% of water that hits the ground from rain events runs off versus 10%. And again, that has some real world implications. And here are some of those real world implications. These are two roads that I take sometimes to work. As Jen mentioned, we've all experienced flooding and impacts on our way to work. Here's two of them, just that I've personally had to have issues with. And here's a few others. These aren't, the Irenes and, Katrinas and Sandy. These are just not everyday rain events, but these are not your extreme weather events. But that being said, what many of us grew up with from a rainfall event is changing. And that has changed over years. And this slide's a couple years old, but in the first 70 years of the 20th century, New Jersey experienced a little over 44 inches of rain. The first 14 or 15 years of the 21st century, that's raised to 47, almost 48 inches, which gives you almost 3.5 inches of more rain than we used to have and that we are used to dealing with. And that, and that means we are dealing with a lot more rain that has to be addressed, and a lot more rain that has to be addressed as the state continues to urbanize and has impervious cover. That water has to go somewhere. And at the same time as we're having more rain, the patterns of that rainfall has changed. So in the Northeast, we are having more heavy precipitation events versus a long-term gentle rain that I remember as a child fondly, but more of it's coming down in a more intense period of time, which means our land cover, our systems have less opportunity to address it. And not only are we having to deal with more rain, more volume, but that has real world implications, real world impacts for water quality. Every 2 years, the state of New Jersey comes out with a water quality report. It's required by federal law. This is the most recent one from 2016, and red is not good. And that red means we have water that is not meeting standards, that are not healthy enough for aquatic life, is not healthy enough for recreation, is not healthy enough for water supply. And this is 2016, and in case people, and I've been accused of this, think I've cherry-picked a report, 2010, 6 years ago, a little different format, but generally the same result. And if I went back to 2006, 2004, we would generally have the same thing. Our modern stormwater rules came out in 2004, and we've been implementing them since. And DEP has indicated in that 2016 report and the 2014 report that we are seeing declining water quality trends. And that has been, most part, because of urban runoff, because of how we, as a developed state, are addressing our stormwater management, our stormwater. According to the 2016 report, declining water quality trends of total dissolved solids, chlorides, and again, from that same report, there's a correlation between our land development and our water quality. And there's a picture of a stream in a municipality not to be named, but that's a highly eroded stream bank. And we actually have photos of this stream over the last several years, and that stream bank has eroded more and more and more just in a few years that we have photos of. So all of that sediment has gone somewhere. All of that sediment has impacted aquatic life. All that sediment has impacted water quality. So there are some real implications. And as mentioned, stormwater rules, our modern ones came out in 2004, and we updated them just in March, the Green Infrastructure Rule. But we're having this, and we're having a trend towards the report card of a C. And if that's, as I tell my kids, if that's the best you can do, that's great. But I know my kids can do better, and I think the state of New Jersey can do better from water quality, because the goal for water quality is not to become average, but actually to restore and enhance water quality so it returns to a natural condition. And that's the goal we've had in New Jersey since the Water Pollution Control Act and the Federal Clean Water Act. So that was a very quick run through of sort of real world water quality implications. As Jen mentioned, we're all experiencing flooding. We can all point to roads and areas of our town that flood, and that maybe didn't flood as a kid or only flooded when it was an extreme event, but now is becoming more and more prevalent. So with that, I'm going to hand this back over to Clay to talk about what the new rule is. And if I can figure out how to stop sharing. There we go. There you go, Clay.
Give me the thumbs up when you see my screen. All right. So first of all, thanks, Mike, and a special thank you to the Watershed Institute for putting this together and having me here with everyone today. I'm really honored to do this, and I would plug the site visit to the Watershed Institute as well. I've been there a number of times, and I'm sure there's many of you on the webinar that haven't, and I would encourage you to go visit. I'm not sure what they're doing right now with the pandemic, but it really is quite a place to see and visit, especially if you have continuing interest in what probably brings most of us together here today for. So, Mike, thank you for the introduction, and Jim, and we'll get right into this. So, what's the big picture? What's the short version elevator speech? I have this picture here of I guess that's a scroll, I'm not sure, as my poor attempt at one. It says, "Thou shalt not flood thy neighbor's property nor pollute thy water." And those are commandments that we're all rather familiar with from the current stormwater post 2004. And a lot of that hasn't changed. But the DEP has made a number of improvements to the existing rule, and most notably that green infrastructure is required to meet the three primary performance metrics, if you will. And I do also, as Jennifer did, have to give them kudos for taking this on and also going through a rather lengthy stakeholder process and getting input from public, from probably many of you participated in a lot of that. And I think that they really did an excellent job with that to get us to where we are now. So very brief review, what I'm going to go over, some introduction stuff, and then dive into some of the details that maybe you aren't as familiar with. So again, starting with a little bit of the bigger picture and to try and keep things as interesting as possible. What is green infrastructure? Well, in our line of work, we look at it as more than just stormwater BMPs. So we're thinking about wetland creation, reconnecting floodplains, living shorelines, and I say here that it's a new approach to design with a focus on natural processes. So, nature is an amazing thing, and things have evolved to work a certain way, and if we can take advantage of those processes to our benefit, that's what we're looking to do, and that's more my general definition of green infrastructure. And although probably none of us did much celebrating in April, but this year did mark the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And I was listening to a story the other day talking about this photo here from Apollo 8, I think it's called Earthrise, and that apparently really raised the awareness of the impact that we were having on the planet at a critical time in the late 60s and into the 70s. And if some of you may have seen some of my presentations before, I do often include this reference to Design with Nature, who was a local Philadelphia person, sort of transplant, I guess. So these concepts that we're talking about today were things that have been considered in the past, but in our slice of that, blue marble in that picture taken from the moon here in New Jersey, the state of New Jersey, one of the critical environmental problems we face is that of stormwater runoff, because we're at a point where we have a lot of infrastructure that Mike will talk about later, a built-up environment, and we have sensitive receiving waters that, of course, we all rely on for one thing or another. And speaking on things, relying on our hydrologic cycle, here's a picture of the state fish, I believe, brook trout. And believe it or not, there's a self-reproducing population of these fish in southern New Jersey, where you wouldn't expect it. It is not stocked. And it's a very weird watershed, and it has a lot of the processes that we're going to talk about here today that, believe it or not, come back to this green infrastructure amended rule to thank for maintaining this really unique water quality in this very small tributary. So we'll connect those dots. But for now, we're going to focus on that, I think, somewhat narrow definition of green infrastructure as it relates to managing runoff from impervious cover. And this is a schematic clip from 50 years ago from some of that work that I referenced. So what is old is new, but here it is, and the clock is ticking here on these amended stormwater rules. So I can have, and you can have whatever definitions you want, but what matters here is that the state has their own definition, and that's referenced here. This is directly from the amendment, the new rules. And so the definition of green infrastructure means a stormwater management measure that manages stormwater close to its source. We'll come back to that part of the definition by one or more of the following three things: treating stormwater runoff through infiltration into subsoil, or treating it through filtration by vegetation or soil, and that is an or in there, or storing stormwater runoff for later reuse. I also often have this photo because we see a lot of green infrastructure. We see a lot of stormwater practices, but we never see them with this fourth dimension that is time, I guess, if that's a fair way to say that. So we get a snapshot of this throughout the year. And what we have here is just one growing season. And I put this in here because these systems, many of them can really be living, resilient systems. So if you see this kind of productivity going on above the ground surface in this shallow traffic island here that was constructed, you can imagine all the things that are going on in the soil beneath this that help keep this system working and working without a lot, or in this case, any maintenance besides mowing once in the late winter. So we can talk about definitions, but I like pictures. Here's a couple pictures. You know, what is green infrastructure? Both of these pictures are relatively recent projects. The top is a basin retrofit that we completed in a residential neighborhood where the adjacent property owners wanted, you know, kind of a multifunctional system. They wanted the flora and fauna. They had a typical nasty detention basin, and this was the finished product that they got. And then the photo at the bottom here would also meet that definition of green infrastructure, but what you're looking at is a subsurface storage system that could be an infiltration system as well to meet that definition. And that's going to have a parking lot on top of it. So we got to think of the wide range of things that would fit this definition. We'll get more into that. Sometimes the best way to define things is to define what they're not. And this is probably an all too familiar site. Typical detention basin, concrete low flow channel. They've got the left turn only retaining wall thing there at the outfall. You know, and you can see here you've got the mandatory 1 inch of ponded water to provide habitat for the mosquitoes. And there's nothing here that really screams, you know, water quality. So these things might be forced into extinction, at least as it applies to future development going forward. So again, the 3 primary performance metrics are generally unchanged. And as a quick refresher, we're talking about groundwater recharge, water quality, and peak flow control, or water quantity as it's referred to in New Jersey. So those performance metrics, as I said, are unchanged. There's discussion about those. Maybe that's something that will change in the future, but for now, there are no changes there. That may seem surprising. But the big change here is that how these are met in practice, in other words, what needs to be done to demonstrate that compliance, is different in I would say many cases, not necessarily all. So this is the Cliff Notes version here that you'll be getting. There's more information. I'll give you some links where you can find more. You probably, many of you, sounds like if you've sought this out, you're on the ball and you're looking at things, and maybe some of this will be a review. But the key points here is that green infrastructure, I have abbreviated GI here, shall be used to meet the criteria. They published tables, specifically tables 5-1 and 2 primarily, which summarize how each BMP type can be applied. And some of these BMPs will now have drainage area limitations, which is a brand new thing. And one other thing I don't have a slide on here, another point, is that the amended rules, the arrangement and the ordering of the chapters has been totally shuffled. And that's a good thing. The new order that the state placed them in is, I think, much clearer and easier and more logical. So that's another improvement that they made. But if you're used to your sections, they're gonna mix them up on you. So keep an eye out for that as you go through. In addition to the BMPs themselves, there is some other changes that require some discussion here, and that is the definition of major development itself. So some of this is fairly new. They've added the dates there, changed the dates there since February 2nd, 2004. But items 3 and 4 here are new. The creation of 1/4 acre or more of regulated motor vehicle surface, and then they have to put in a combination of 2 and 3 above. In other words, the take home here is that the term major development, that regulated motor vehicle surface, which we haven't defined yet, is kind of treated the same as impervious cover in terms of the definition of a major development. So that is something to keep an eye on. So these slides are a little busy, but I would be in trouble if I didn't include them. So these are taken, I took this more or less, just some minor formatting from the amended rules. And basically this is table 5-1. You'll probably get more familiar with this. And these are the BMPs that can be used for recharge, water quantity, and water quality. And so, you know, you can go across this and pick your favorite one, the ones that you'll see the most of. You know, small scale infiltration basins, you get 80% TSS removal. They can be used for water quantity as well. Let's see if I can use this thing. And they can obviously be used for recharge, and they have to have a 2-foot minimum separation from seasonal high water table, a topic that I could go on and on about, but I'll try not to. And so a wide variety of different BMPs. These are all depending on the exact, in some cases, the type of an MTD, but these are all considered green infrastructure practices that would be available.
Clay, if you could just very quickly just explain what a BMP is.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I apologize. I can't stand it when people speak in acronyms that I don't know. So yeah, a BMP, when I say BMP, I'm thinking just any stormwater management practice, something that an engineer likely is required to design, in this case, to support a land development application. So things like dry wells, detention basins, although you don't see that on the list here, bioretention systems, these are all BMPs. Another acronym that I have here listed, manufactured treatment devices, you'll hear me say MTDs, which are proprietary boxes that are typically placed underground that provide some kind of water quality treatment for stormwater runoff. And I'll be mindful of my acronyms going forward. Here, I've got 2 other ones. This is one, seasonal high water table, SHWT. Again, that's something that in New Jersey is really a pretty big issue. Then table 5-2, these are BMPs that may only be used for quantity. And here you see infiltration basins, bioretention systems. And if I apologize, I'm gonna go back one slide. Some of these have asterisks, and I'll come back to that, but generally this is where those drainage area limitations come into play. So for systems like dry wells, again, the manufactured treatment devices, pervious pavement, and small scale bioretention and infiltration basins and sand filters. I'll come back to that point. These are the ones, this is table 5-3, which I didn't reference earlier intentionally. And that is because these are the ones that you would technically need a waiver for. So these would not be considered to meet the definition of green infrastructure generally. And again, manufactured treatment devices kind of show up in both places because there are some that meet that definition of green infrastructure and some that do not. So if you're wondering why, you've seen that a couple times, that's why. And this is where our friend, the extended detention basin, lies. So again, this is new. Drainage area limitations. So recall in the definition that it had a statement there that these are systems that manage stormwater close to its source. So the only way that they could encourage or regulate that is to set these drainage area limitations. And I'll have some examples that illustrate that later. Dry wells, maximum of 1 acre, that's actually existing. That's in the BMP manual, or was even before this. Pervious pavement, a 3-to-1 ratio, I'll explain that. And then these other systems, the drainage area limitation that they finally arrived on was 2.5 acres. 1 acre was discussed for some time during the stakeholder process, but it's 2.5 in the amended rules. Very quickly on the pervious pavement, so you'll see some places where it's applied in this close-up video. Standard asphalt in the high traffic and truck loading areas. In this case, porous concrete in the parking stalls, and they're just saying that you shouldn't have more than 3 square feet per square foot of pervious pavement. I like the loading ratio approach. It's what's done on the other side of the river in Pennsylvania, but we have the drainage area limitations here to work with. So again, 2.5 acres. Obviously, if your site is smaller than 2.5 acres, this isn't something that is going to change the layout of your stormwater management, or it's not going to influence your application that you might be receiving at your municipality. And I say it will encourage, but really require designers. DEP doesn't encourage anyone to do anything, right? They write requirements. So, and this will force them, designers and engineers, to distribute these BMPs throughout the site, which is a good thing. And that's one of the reasons that they did this. In terms of their operation, they're going to function a lot better. Also, one clarification that the amended rules made is that these 3 primary performance criteria must be met in each drainage area. So if you have a site that's large, or you have a site that's kind of up in a headwater areas where parts of the site are draining in different ways, they've made that clear that, before people would do some averaging things, or I can do a little more over here, let me just let that side of the site go. So they need to be met at each discharge point. So perhaps this isn't the best example that I scrounged up here, but if you have a site like this, that these aren't really different tributaries it's discharging to, but it needs to be met at each location. This is a huge warehouse site that we're seeing a lot of in the state. So it would have to be demonstrated at each point. So how will this influence land development applications? Well, we don't know exactly. We've done some looking at this, and obviously the idea is that it will lead to decentralized systems. An example of that, this is a large land development application where you can see there's stormwater systems kind of spread around the site here, breaking it up. This is a site where I think we would meet that 2.5 acre limitation by just, instead of having one basin, having multiple basins, multiple smaller systems spread around. Here's a relatively recent post-2004 application that will not look like this in the future. So fairly large infiltration / detention basin at the low point. This is the easy thing. This is what engineers are used to doing. But it's got a 30-acre drainage area. So that's not gonna fly anymore. This is the typical approach. And I put here, no more big basin at the bottom of the hill, the bottom of the project. And, large residential projects, the warehouse industry that's booming right now, this is something that's going to make changes in those applications, and changes for the better in terms of receiving water bodies. Another example, what this might mean, this is a mixed use commercial residential application, and they've got a a rain garden that's actually quite big at a third of an acre, but they have technically over 3 acres that go to it. So while that basin is, in my opinion, plenty big for that drainage area, and that red area is the drainage area to the blue area here, that's labeled as 0.33. That would exceed what these rules put into place. So this would have to be broken up into 2 separate systems to make sure that your drainage area stays below that 2.5 acre threshold. So it wouldn't change technically this one from visually what you see too much, but even this wouldn't quite comply. The motor vehicle surfaces, I said we'd come back to that, and maybe this is an acronym we'll start to see now, MVS, I don't know. But this is a new part of the major development definition. So you can think of this as kind of a new trigger for that definition to kick in. The other reason that this motor vehicle surface is new, or the other thing that you need to know about it, is there's a definition for it, of course, and it basically is what you'd expect, intended to be used by motor vehicles and or aircraft, and is directly exposed to precipitation. So this wouldn't apply to under levels of a parking deck or something, but not limited to driveways, parking areas, parking garages being the top parking deck, roads, racetracks, and runways. These surfaces now require 80% TSS water quality treatment. So not everything fit into that before, and this is a change. And again, you have to look at what's not necessarily included in this as well. So what this rules in and what it rules out. Standard pavement, drive, and parking areas, yes, and that was always the case. They always required 80% TSS for your water quality compliance. Gravel and dirt drive and parking areas, that was kind of a gray area before. It won't be so gray anymore. That's a definite yes, definitely meets the definition for a motor vehicle surface. Rooftops, which are hopefully impervious, or green like you have there at the Watershed Institute, no. And that was kind of wasn't really enforced anyway in my experience. Same thing here, sidewalks or other ground level non-vehicular areas, like perhaps the plaza here, this is New Jersey. As I read the definitions, no, that would not require water quality control, and maybe that did before, but strict read and interpretation, I think I've bounced this slide off DEP before. So there's some things that brings in and some things that it brings out. One quick, I know we've got a lot of folks from environmental commissions and municipalities on here about motor vehicle surfaces, and this is a side note of my own here. When people are including these kind of areas, gravel parking areas, we often see them somewhat misrepresented in their stormwater management reports. And really, they should not be using these numbers here directly from, this is the TR55 tables that some of you may have heard of. This is what engineers use to design these BMPs. They should really be using a curve number of 96 or 98, which is typically use 98 to represent the runoff characteristics from standard pavement. And that is now in the draft Chapter 5 BMP manual, which I'll talk about later. It is also coming straight from NRCS discussions that we've had personally. And it's also kind of common sense. But anyway, the first two seem to carry more weight. So municipal ordinance revisions, yes, that's what a lot of you are perhaps working on now or starting to seriously consider. Do you have to revise your stormwater control ordinance? Short answer is yes. I guess the long answer is yes, a little longer. But the rules represent the minimum standard, and they must be revised to, at a minimum, be consistent with these amendments. The clock is ticking. This thing says here that we're in the 5 minutes of the 11th hour, but it's not that late. But as Jennifer said, time is flying, and that's not so far away, and that being March 3rd, 2021. But don't worry, there's lots of good guidance out there. Obviously, you can talk to Mike Pissar and the folks at the Watershed Institute. They have some resources that they're working on. The state has, as of March, has put up Appendix D, a new model stormwater control ordinance that gives you a huge head start, the ability to do things like lower the threshold requiring stormwater management. Had some interest from municipalities about that. Perhaps increase the TSS requirement, and there are other municipalities in the state that do that as well. And this is one thing about that threshold. You know, this is some. You can see the building footprints in this neighborhood all look like the ones on the left when they were built. And if you go through this neighborhood in Google Earth, do a tour, you'll find many that were drastically improved. So you went from something that was 16% impervious to 62%. And none of this is really being captured in probably most all, with the exception of David here, what he's going to talk about, current ordinances. There are some BMP manual revisions, and I'm going to wrap this up here. Last couple slides. They're still technically out for public comment. They were looking for these earlier, chapter 5 and 12. There's the link there. Just New Jersey BMP manual search. You'll get these links to all these new sections on the state site. There's also, this has been accepted here, chapter 13, groundwater table hydraulic impact assessment for infiltration BMPs. This is going to become a bigger deal with the revised rules. And what I'm talking about here is a lot of those systems, those green infrastructure systems that are going to be accepted, rely on infiltration to function. And there's a whole guidance document that the state has prepared with it through a stakeholder process to make sure that those are being designed in a way that won't lead to either premature failure or them not operating like they're supposed to from day one. And that's what I was talking about, the importance of seasonal high water table, something that I could talk to you more about if time permitted. But the gist of it is we've all heard this 2-foot separation from seasonal high groundwater is required. And the big stop sign here is that that doesn't necessarily mean that it will work. So in those tables, 5, 1, 2, and 3 of the new rules, they list the separation. But again, that is not the green light that means that the system will function. And I think that's something that hasn't always been understood. So that was a little bit of a whirlwind tour there. And I know we're doing Q&A at the end, and Mike has been gathering those up. But with that, my email address is here, and I thank you for your time and your attention. Hopefully there was some new information there for you. And with that, I will turn it back over to Mike, who will take it from there.
You need to unmute, Mike.
David, I think that's the first time anyone actually wanted to hear what I said. Clay, thank you very much for that presentation. I keep learning stuff every time we go through this. One of the things I want to point out from a couple of questions, yes, there is starting to be a huge push of development and redevelopment throughout this state. But until the municipality adopts a new ordinance, and hopefully an enhanced ordinance, none of what Clay just spoke about or what I'm going to speak about applies. The old rules still apply. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to get going and get moving so we can actually start to see some improvements. As Clay mentioned, and I'm going to sort of paraphrase, what DEP did was change the tools you use to meet the standards, they didn't change the standards at all. And that's unfortunate, as I went through sort of the slides in the beginning, water quality is still degrading. And so one of the problems we have is the stormwater management rules aren't designed to stop water pollution. They're designed to slow it down, the rate of increase, the rate of degradation. And they only apply in some circumstances. They don't apply to all developments, all building. It only applies to a subset of that. It also doesn't address a host of issues that before we had stormwater management. I mean, the modern rules is 2004. Before that, we had rules that dealt with flood control, I think in the late 70s, early 80s. But none of the new rules that we're talking about addresses anything that's on the ground now. One of our enhancements is going to address that. And I cannot stress this enough because I hear this all the time. And Clay, Jen, David, you probably hear this all the time. The quantity controls, well, quantity is going to be reduced. It's not quantity. In fact, when you develop, more runoff is going to happen. It's inevitable. What you're changing is how fast that runoff runs off the site. You're not reducing how much runs off. You're actually increasing it. You're just slowing it down. But I've heard, applicants, engineers, I've heard planning board members say, well, it's quantity control, we're reducing the quantity. That is absolutely not accurate, and that's one of the problems. So the Watershed Institute and our partners have worked through a series of enhancements. We actually started this back in 2016, and Princeton took on that challenge, and David will talk about that experience a bit. But those enhancements that we hope to get done and hopefully municipalities can adopt sooner versus later. There we go. And one of the big things I want to get out, because this is an issue, can municipalities be stronger? Can they adopt a stormwater ordinance that is stronger? I think the answer is clearly yes. I'm going to caveat that a bit. As Clay mentioned, there is a model ordinance that DEP put out. It's on their website. It's Appendix D, but in that, I've highlighted in blue, and I apologize, unlike Clay, I'm very word focused, not pictures, so my slides will have a lot of words. But I've highlighted the important parts. Water pollution laws allow municipalities to take additional actions. The MS4 permit, which is that authorization for municipalities to collect and discharge and treat stormwater, specifically allows for stronger stormwater ordinances. And the model ordinance, and this is language directly from it, may choose to do stronger and additional measures. I think it's a good practice for the municipality when they do that to sort of explain in their resolution, in their ordinance, adopting these stronger protections, to explain why they're going above and beyond. One of the biggest sort of hurdles, there's a thing called the Residential Site Improvement Standards, RSIS, which is used as a cudgel. And it is deemed, at least for residential development, not to allow for stronger protections. I think that is false. That RSIS, the statute itself, specifically allows for stronger protections where there is a gain to protection of public health and safety. I think that's quite clear, but there's a caveat. There is some uncertainty in that. So one of the recommendations, and this is what Princeton is going to be doing, is adopting not only these enhancements as part of their stormwater ordinance, but also incorporating them into their zoning ordinance, because municipalities have the absolute ability to zone and put those standards into the zoning ordinance. So that is a way to address the concerns that RSIS may impact, which only applies to residential development. And stormwater doesn't care. Pollution doesn't care where it's coming from. It's coming off a lawn where you've put pesticides on, or from a house, or a lawn from a corporate campus. Doesn't matter. It's still pollution. It's still runoff. That's an issue. But again, I think since our stormwater management rules are water pollution laws, it should be clear that you can go stronger. You should probably just take a few steps to explain why and add those protections in your zoning code as well. So what are those enhancements that we've been talking about? They generally run into a couple of categories. Redefine what is a major development, which is what New Jersey stormwater rules only apply to those large developments. Address smaller developments. Address redevelopment. So sort of what I've been calling the sins of the past before we even knew they were sins, developments that may have gone in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even in the 70s that had no stormwater management. If they get redeveloped, they by and large do not have meaningful stormwater management going forward, and we need to fix that. Capture and treat stormwater on site. Enhance our analysis of what we are doing and how our systems are going to be work. And then having a reporting requirement for municipalities so they understand what's going on in the town. And I'm going to go into a lot more detail on all these, but this is sort of just a broad outline of the categories of enhancements. And we do have a model enhanced ordinance on our website, and I will link to it at the end of this presentation so people have that, as well as DEP's model ordinance. So I mentioned, changing the triggers for major development. Right now, major development is defined as a half acre, of an acre of soil disturbance and a quarter acre of new impervious. We should be reducing those to a half acre soil disturbance and 5,000 square feet of impervious cover. That would capture more developments so that you are getting the full level of stormwater management. Include redevelopment. Again, if you have a site that has a quarter acre of impervious surface, you raise that and you put a new quarter acre of impervious surface. If you didn't have stormwater management beforehand, by and large, you really don't necessarily have that afterwards. So getting at that, so again, some of our older urban areas, even our older suburban areas that developed without stormwater management, here's an opportunity to start to do it. Start having your stormwater management addressed on site closest to the pollution source. And that's sort of the philosophy behind the whole green infrastructure rule. Decentralize and bring the treatment closer to the site. Retain on site the 95th percentile rain event, so the rain event that will occur 95% of the time. Keep that on site so you're not having that discharge at all, so you're reducing the volume that's coming off your site. And that's going to have a huge protection. I will say DEP is looking at various addition changes. Jen and I and others have been working on phase 2 stormwater management rules, and DEP has talked about climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation rules. DEP has announced, at least in a stakeholder meeting a couple of weeks ago, that they're going to require an on-site retention standard going forwards. That's going to be 1.25 inches of stormwater or the water quality design storm, but that's coming, so do that now. Get it done. You're going to reduce volume, you're going to reduce pollutants coming off your site, and that will be helpful. Minor development. So you'll have a lot of instances where even with the reduced major development, so that half acre soil disturbance or 5,000 square feet of impervious cover, you're not going to trigger that. But you're still contributing to stormwater runoff, you're still contributing a pollution load to your receiving body, to your stormwater system the municipality has. So trying to address that. And what we did is we kind of craft a very simple mechanism to figure out what you have to do. You have 250 square feet of impervious surface, you have to start treating 2 gallons per square foot. So that 250 square foot addition or your 3,000 square foot home, which wouldn't trigger major development, will still have to help address the problem and help reduce the pollution loading to your local water bodies. But that 250 square foot addition would have to treat 500 gallons of stormwater. And that's basically a 2-year storm, about 3.3 inches of rain. Again, an on-site retention standard, again, try not to leave it out so you're not flooding out your neighbor, you're not contributing to a volume downstream because everybody is downstream. And at some point, downstream will flood, and trying to minimize and eliminate that. And also this on-site retention standard helps to anticipate. So our stormwater numbers, our storm numbers, that 2-year storm, 10-year storm, 100-year storm, are all based upon the data that ended in 2006 and goes back about 106 years. So if you remember that earlier slide where I had the increase in the 21st century, a lot of that increase is not included in our storm numbers. DEP is talking about revising those numbers, but here's a way to start to address that by that on-site retention standard. And then, again, including redevelopment. So smaller business, smaller commercial entities, smaller buildings that are, removed and rebuilt, again, incorporating stormwater management in that design to help address going forward. And also understanding that there are going to be circumstances where you cannot do stormwater management on site for various reasons, in providing a relief valve. And that relief valve, at least from a mitigation fee, only applies to minor development, not major development. DEP did revamp how major development gets waivers or variances and really tighten that up. And here's just a couple examples of what minor developments throughout the state. There are probably about 2 or 3 dozen towns that have a minor development ordinance, and that ranges somewhere from 200 square feet of new impervious surface. Princeton has 400 square feet. I couldn't get them to go to 250 square feet, but that's okay, to about 1,000 square feet of new impervious surface. So here's sort of the triggers that are throughout the state for minor development. So, this is not something we created, but has been going on throughout the state. And once you've triggered that, there are various levels of treatment. You have to infiltrate 3 inches of runoff per square foot. A lot of towns have that, and that 3 inches is just about that 2-year storm or that 2 gallons per square foot that we're recommending. Cranford has a sliding scale. Princeton, again, has that 2 gallons per square foot of impervious cover to treat. And treat it with green infrastructure. As I mentioned, we try to create a system where you didn't have to, no offense, Clay, to hire an engineer to figure out what you have to do if you're putting on a sunroom or in addition to your home, or you're building a modest home that doesn't trigger major development. We wanted a way you can take a look, figure out what you had to do with your architect or your landscape architect, and really incorporate it. And I'm going to skip ahead 1 second. There's a lot of charts out there, a lot of material out there on how to do green infrastructure, how to do rain gardens. Here's an example from Rutgers Water Resource Program to sort of give you an idea. I have 500 square feet of impervious surface. I may need a 200 square foot rain garden, depending on your soils. And I also look at this, if you're doing an addition, you're doing new construction, you're going to have landscaping. So have that landscaping incorporate stormwater management. So it's doing double duty. It's, providing an aesthetic value to your property, but as well as handling your stormwater. Very few people do an addition or do, a new construction, and yet does not do landscaping. So that's another sort of aspect that we thought would be very useful and not an additional obligation on a landowner that they weren't going to undertake anyway. And I mentioned there's going to be some circumstances, and again, I want to stress this waiver fee that we're advocating is only possible for minor developments. There's a whole other set of requirements for major development, but there's going to be circumstances where there's no room for green infrastructure. You have contaminated soils, you may not want to do that. Or in order to do green infrastructure, you have to cut down trees, which may not be a benefit, because trees are a stormwater management benefit. There is one site, property owner, was talking about doing green infrastructure, the place to do it logically on their property, because of the way things flow, was in the floodplain of a stream that floods very regularly. Again, not probably the best way to do it. So having a mechanism where the property owner can say, it doesn't make sense to do green infrastructure on my site, or I can't do all of that requirement, to pay a fee to the municipality, which the municipality can then use to do improvements elsewhere to compensate. But to provide a sort of level of flexibility to the homeowner, to the property owner, and yet still have stormwater management happen. The other thing we put in our model ordinance is enhancing the analysis that developers have to do when they come for major development to a planning board, to a zoning board. What are the environmental features on site or adjacent? Are we talking about forests? Are we talking about core forests? Because as you start to lose core forests, I wish I didn't have a hard time saying that today, you start to invite invasive species, which is a problem. And forests are a carbon sink, climate change, and stormwater benefit. So you want to maintain your forests. Taking a look at how you're rerouting stormwater throughout your site so that you have a wetland, and the rules say you should stay mostly away from wetlands. But if your site is regraded and you're draining all the stormwater away from that wetland, what is that long-term impact to that wetland? Are you starving it and it will no longer be a wetland in a few years? So taking a look at that and having an analysis so the developer or the applicant can show that wetland will survive, will still provide stormwater benefits, because wetlands are a great benefit from stormwater management. They provide flood buffering, they filter out pollutants, they provide habitat and flood storage. So we want to keep that. And what are the impacts? And really focus on the impacts downstream to your adjacent property owners. I've seen lots of circumstances where I've developed, I'm routing stormwater, and the impact is next door. Their property is now soggy mess and not usable or not what it used to be. So having that up front, having that analysis up front, so that when applicants come forward to the planning board can look at that and really have a deciding factor of what's going to happen and what's going to happen downstream. Couple things. So Clay mentioned that motor vehicle traveled surface is what is going to get water quality treatment, and roof runoff, sidewalks, patios aren't. We think that's a mistake. That is a change from the way the rules were written beforehand in 2004, because that runoff is not clean. What comes off a roof is not necessarily clean. It has, leaf litter. It has air deposition, so heavy metals and other things that are deposited by rainstorms on your roof. Bird droppings are on your roof, and that gets into the runoff from a roof. All of the fertilizers, insecticides, pesticides, herbicides that you put on, or sand or de-icer you put on your sidewalks and patios, all of that gets run off into the stormwater. And when DEP proposed that new definition, they admitted that runoff, that non-motor vehicle surface runoff, wasn't clean, but it was cleaner. We think that is a mistake in a state where most of our waterways are not meeting one or more standards. It seems like you're missing a low-hanging fruit to treat. And if you're removing that sediment, that TSS, that pollution, before you run into a quantity or recharge treatment, you're extending the life of that system because you're not clogging it up with sediment or other pollutants. So we think that's a mistake, and we don't think municipalities should adopt that aspect of the new rule. The other thing the new rule took out is the thing called non-structural strategies. There were 9 of them. They were mostly ignored by developers. Disconnecting impervious surfaces, maintaining on-site drainage features, using low impact construction equipment. That came out of the design requirements, were put into the stormwater management planning. We think that should stay. And And to use an extreme example of why, so, Clay talked about stormwater management and 2.5 acre drainage systems, using green infrastructure, using nature. By the letter of the new ordinance, the new regulations, I can take a site, completely clear it of all trees, regrade that entire site, put a couple of rain gardens in, and I've met the green infrastructure rule. That kind of seems to miss the whole intent of the rule of using nature, mimicking nature, and using the resources you have to treat stormwater. And as I mentioned, trees are an enormous stormwater benefit. They absorb stormwater, they filter out pollutants, so you're losing that. So we think that's a mistake. I mean, municipalities will have a steep slope ordinance, they will have a stream corridor ordinance, they may have a tree protection ordinance, will help eliminate some of that extreme. But by a letter of the law, you could do that. And we think that's a mistake. You should keep those in your ordinance. We've called them a low impact design because people have a whole problem with the non-structural. But we've kept that in the design requirements so that applicants come in, they have to show that they've used these low impact design standards up front and then put the stormwater management in to minimize their impacts. As I mentioned, most of our waterways don't meet standard. I showed the 2 slides from DEP's water quality reports showing impacts. What DEP does, and this is a federal law, they will come up with what's called a total maximum daily load, which is a pollution budget. How much pollution can I put into a waterway and it will meet standards? Now that pollution budget will show you have to reduce your current allowance because we are now over that budget. And they will allocate that budget to various sources, wastewater treatment plants, urban stormwater management, agriculture, etc. What doesn't happen is take that budget, that allocation, and then incorporate it into your stormwater management. So your stormwater management is exactly the same for a development that is not going to an impaired waterway as it is to an impaired waterway. So if you have a waterway that has too much sediment in it already, your stormwater management doesn't change. Other states do that. They require better stormwater management. They require municipalities to look at how to reduce the existing load. And we think that should be incorporated in stormwater analysis, and municipalities do. Up here is just a couple stream catchers of a TMDL for the Raritan Basin, including the Stony Brook watershed, Carnegie Lake, Upper Millstone. I've highlighted 2. So stormwater from residential cover has to be reduced by 84% into that watershed. That is 84% reduction from existing loading. So what stormwater management rules do is allow an increase of pollution into that waterway. It's an increase by 20%, but it's still an increase. It's not a reduction. So taking a look and incorporating sort of an enhanced stormwater management into these water bodies that have already been burdened, I think that would make sense. And I think that is actually required by the Clean Water Act and the law. So we're encouraging municipalities to incorporate that. Then a reporting requirement. So all stormwater management, and this has been in existence since 2004, has to be maintained. That is probably one of the bigger sort of omissions for most property owners. In 2018, DEP released a new permit for the municipalities, which authorized them to collect and treat stormwater, to review stormwater management plans and approve them for development. And at the end of each year, municipalities have to report back to DEP that all of their publicly and privately owned stormwater management systems are being maintained and are operational. What we've recommended to municipalities is to have an annual stormwater permit. So all responsible parties, all parties that have a stormwater management system on their property gets a permit. They have to submit reports to the municipality that these things are being maintained, and that municipality has the opportunity to go out, audit those reports to make sure that's in fact happening. We've recommended a fee, mostly because it helped the municipality defray the cost of implementing the program and complying with their permit. And again, I don't look at this as necessarily a new requirement for the municipality. I look at this as a mechanism to help them comply with what they have to comply with, and hopefully help improve stormwater management so they identify sites that aren't working and go back and fix that. And then I have a bunch of examples of green infrastructure, so we have a sense of what it is. But what I'm going to do is hand this off to David to talk about Princeton's experience with the enhancements that they did in 2017 and what they're going through at this point. So I'm going to stop sharing, David, and you are up.
Thank you, Mike. And let me pull up my slides. And before I start going through the specifics of what we've done, I do want to make a little bit of a pitch for any municipal officials who are on the webinar, and just say that this is not sort of a selfless gesture to just help the state and help our water bodies. It's also something that really has a local benefit. And I think Mike, when we were preparing for this presentation, mentioned to me that some local officials are concerned that local residents will object strenuously to the enhancements that the Watershed Institute is recommending. But we're really finding, not only are we able to promote the better stormwater regulations on the basis of environmental considerations, and we do have a climate action plan that was just adopted in Princeton in the last year or so, which focuses a lot on some of these issues, but also it really is a benefit from the standpoint of emergency preparedness and emergency management. The kinds of flooding that we've had in Princeton, the experiences we had with Irene and Sandy have, given our residents a real appreciation for the fact that we locally have flooding problems. And, the few first responders who we've lost, who've been killed on the line of duty, have been killed during flooding events. So this is something you can get your environmental activists on board with, but it's also something you can get your police and your EMTs on board with, because it really is something that impacts their work as well. So that being said, in 2017, we did adopt the basic enhanced regulations that Mike talked about earlier, where we essentially reduced the trigger level for major projects to that 5,000 square feet of new impervious and the quarter, I guess half acre of disturbance. But we also implemented rules that would govern smaller projects as well. And he mentioned going down to 400 square feet of new impervious coverage. So if someone's doing a small home addition, or even doing a new patio and widening their driveway, they have to comply with the kinds of modest stormwater requirements that the Institute is recommending. And we did it through a process, went initially to our Environmental Commission, and the Stormwater Institute presented to them the kinds of rules they wanted to suggest for Princeton. And they studied the issue and they got on board with it. They brought it to council, and again, the Institute helped with presentation to council. They met with our local developers to try and get some consensus, get input from them on what would be too onerous, what would be acceptable. So it was a good public input process, and it really went through without a lot of difficulty. We are currently in the process of addressing some issues with especially the small projects where the kinds of improvements, whether it be rain gardens or dry wells or whatnot, are not performing up to their intended function. And that's largely been the case because we didn't require testing in advance for infiltration. And so, we're finding that the systems aren't working really as intended, and neighbors are still getting flooded and so forth. So we're in the process of integrating some additional testing requirements to solve that. Just this year, we've been already working on editing the state's model ordinance for the green infrastructure to incorporate the same enhancements that we had already adopted in Princeton. So we're essentially modifying that model ordinance and bringing in the small projects which are not included in the state's requirements, and also the lower thresholds for the large projects. We've had a lot of conversation about the waiver process. And while Mike said that you can't really get waivers for major projects, there are provisions, as I understand it, where you can do off-site improvements. The developer still has to pay for them, but if they can find either a public project that is in the same drainage area close by, or a neighboring private property owner is willing to host a facility, which is probably a pretty theoretical option. Not going to find a neighboring property owner very often who's willing to do that. But the issue that we're coming up against is that we don't really fully understand our stormwater flows in Princeton. We don't have it. We don't have our stormwater flows mapped out. And so the engineering department is working quite energetically right now, in some cases with volunteers, and doing sort of a crowdsourced survey of where we get flooding, and trying to really create a GIS database explaining what our drainage areas are, so that we can understand where these mitigation projects can go. And we do anticipate waivers for small projects with a fee, but at the same time, we're looking to have those waiver fees go into municipal projects to help mitigate stormwater impacts. And that's gotten us thinking about the whole notion of a stormwater utility. So moving on to what we're talking about for the future. And I'll take these dots in reverse order since I was just talking about the stormwater utility. Oops, I didn't edit this. Mike corrected me. In 2019, very recently, the state actually empowered local utilities, local communities to implement a stormwater utility. And basically what that is it's an authority that will take in fees from residents. It basically takes your stormwater management, the expenses of stormwater management, whether it's maintaining your current infrastructure or building new infrastructure, takes those expenses out of the general fund, which all taxpayers are paying for, even if they've got a very lightly developed piece of land. And it's putting the responsibility for paying for stormwater management on the property owners who contribute the most stormwater into the municipal system. So it's basically determined based on amounts of impervious coverage on various properties. We hope we'll be able to adjust that based on whether there are up-to-date stormwater management facilities on those properties, not just look at their impervious, and then have fees that will go into the stormwater utility, and so would the waiver fees. And so that's why I brought it up at this point. And then the other thing that we've been working on this since 2017, literally, since I came on council, is the idea of a redevelopment ordinance. Super important for a town like Princeton, which is fairly built out. You know, if you look at our existing zoning, there are not a lot of opportunities for new development. So almost all of our development in town is redevelopment. And if we're not taking care of stormwater flows on those properties, we're never going to really, I'm not even going to say improve on the flooding conditions and stuff that we have right now. We're not even going to keep up with the impacts of climate change, because we know that we're getting more and more of these dramatic storm events, and we need to get lots more stormwater management in place. And the only way to do it is through properties that are being redeveloped. So this is something that we have a lot of new development in town coming on the basis of our affordable housing settlement. You know, hundreds and hundreds of new housing units. Some of them are on redevelopment. Almost all of them are on redevelopment sites. So we really want to get this in place before those projects start to get constructed, so that we're not missing that major opportunity. That's what I got.
All right, thank you, David. Just a couple more. So we're going to talk about questions and answers in a few seconds. But as I mentioned and has been said, you know, municipalities have to have an effective ordinance by March of 2021. There's a lot of education abilities. We have some of that here. The Watershed Institute, I don't know, Jen, if you want to chime in, and Jack, is more than happy to do some educational presentations to council ECs. To do this, one of the reasons we're doing this as a webinar is to sort of get the word out a little larger. We've given this presentation or something similar to it to about 12 or 15 of our municipalities, but there's a lot. So I am gonna stop sharing for a second again and start to go through some question and answers, or questions, and hopefully people can answer it. So I'll take the first one. Is the mitigation fee an annual fee? No, that would be a one-time for minor developments. As David, you know, sort of clarified, there are mechanisms in the major development to waive requirements. There has to be a mitigation project. That mitigation project has to actually occur before or at the same time as your development is going forward, and the town has to have a mitigation plan or mitigation criteria. So the waiver fee I was mentioning, a mitigation, is for the minor developments going forward. Let's see.
Like, there were just some basic questions. If you could define, or Clay, the 95th storm, and then why is TSS so important? TSS removal so important?
Sure, I'll handle that. I think what Mike meant by the 95th percentile storm is the storm which a depth of which, and this varies across the state. I don't have the exact number on the tip of my tongue. Mike and I were just talking about this before. But at which capture of that storm, and every storm smaller than that, and that portion of all storms larger than that, would constitute 95% of the annual precipitation. So the reality is when it rains in New Jersey, it usually doesn't rain that much. So a lot of the rainfall that happens occurs in relatively small precipitation. You know, a day like today, we just got a little bit of rain. Those smaller storms constitute the vast majority of the annual rainfall. So even designing relatively small green infrastructure approaches, if you're capturing that first ½ inch or 1.25 inches up to 1.25 inches, that's our water quality design storm, you're going to be capturing the vast majority of the annual rainfall by volume. The other question, there were 2 questions in there. The second one was easier, which was the TSS. Why do we care about TSS? Well, we don't specifically care so much about TSS. We do, but in the stormwater rules, we use that as a proxy just to describe water quality in general. The reality is TSS, or total suspended solids, are suspended soil particles, organic content, and a lot of the nutrients that cause the water quality impacts in some of our, you know, lakes and slow estuaries and things like that, depending on where you are in the state. Oftentimes those nutrients or even metals can be attached to the sediment. So if we can capture the sediment and treat the sediment, remove that TSS, we're removing a lot of those other pollutants as well. So that's why the focus is really on TSS. Another reason is that that's compared to the others, a relatively easier thing to measure or monitor. So you'll hear water quality and TSS used interchangeably in the state of New Jersey. It's not like that necessarily everywhere, but it's very convenient in that regard.
And I'll add, the stormwater rules have, and the new set does as well, saying you have to address nutrients to the maximum extent practicable. DEP's looking at, as part of a phase 2 stakeholder process, seeing if there should be a specific standard for nutrients. Should it be 80%? Should it be 50%? And whether that should be differentiated, whether it's suspended or dissolved. That's something to happen, I suspect, in Clay. Let me know if I'm off base, but I think green infrastructure will have a lot to do with removing nutrients, dissolved nutrients, just through the use of vegetation, if it's a vegetated system. So we'll get some added benefits that way.
There was a question from Nicole asking about support for municipalities who are adopting protections that are stronger for the state rules, and expressing some concern that there's no legal support to protect the city from legal challenge on a particular rule. And so, Mike, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. As I mentioned, I think the laws are pretty clear that in the model ordinance, specific DEP's own model ordinance says you are allowed to do this. I understand there's some questions. There is actually a legal case right now running through the courts about this issue, which the Watershed Institute, ANJAC, Sustainable Jersey, and New Jersey Future are supporting a municipality on that. But I think that if a town really sets out the reasons why they are doing this, why they are going stronger, and again, put that in their ordinance, as well as moving these standards not only in their design, land use standards, but put them into their zoning code, that will be that much more protective and supportable in the event a developer decides to be upset. Well, David, if you had any, Princeton has any experience, I haven't heard of anything, but.
Yeah, I am not aware of any challenges, and I have to say, this being Princeton, with a lot of residents who have too much disposable income and too much time on their hands, if we haven't been sued over this, it's pretty definitely a non-issue.
Another question regarding the March 2nd, 2021 deadline. Will any developer who already has an application for a subdivision be grandfathered to the old rules? Will all developments have to abide by the new rules, even if they were already approved? So is there this incentive for developers to get their applications in before March 2nd? And then somewhat related, how will the state be verifying that municipalities have complied and have the new ordinance in place?
Maybe I'll take the first part of that, Mike, and I'll give you the second. I'll be quick. Yes, they announced it March 3rd of this year. So they, that was kind of the grace period. So it's not retroactive. I believe that if something is deemed complete before the March 3rd coming up, that they will not need to comply with the amendments. So, and that's why they gave you that one year window. There might be some more details to that, but in general, that's the gist of it, as I recall.
Yeah. So if a complete application is submitted to the land use board, planning board, zoning board, they're under the old rules. Many ordinances, when the town's adopted, will have this ordinance effective in 60 days, sort of give that sort of grace period to projects that were designed but not yet submitted to the municipality. So to some extent, it is a race, and I am sure there are going to be developments submitted prior to a town adopting the new green infrastructure rule because they want the benefits of the old rule. And that's why we're working so hard to meet with municipalities, to have this webinar, to encourage municipalities to move as quickly as possible, because development is occurring, applications are coming in. And what happens now, what's approved now, we'll live with for several years.
A follow-on question, are municipalities exempt from compliance in their own major development projects?
I don't believe so. They have to comply with the new rules. That's my recollection. And I think it's good practice for the municipality to walk the walk.
Yeah, Mike, I think that's right.
Yeah. Sophie, I forgot someone else said, how's DEP gonna know this happened? These ordinances have to get submitted to the county. County has to review them. And I don't know that DEP is going to go and write a letter to everyone, but when they do their annual review of those annual reports by the municipalities, I'm sure one of those questions are, do you have a stormwater management ordinance?
There's also a question about whether the Watershed Institute is available to do a presentation to a town council regarding the Stormwater Ordinance recommendations.
Yes. I volunteer Sophie.
There's a question here about artificial turf and whether that is considered impervious surface.
I'm sensing the silence from Mike and Dave. I don't know the answer to that. I know that in other places that I work, we do a lot of work. Some local municipalities specifically do consider it impervious. It obviously physically has a lot to do with what's immediately underneath it. And a lot of the manufacturers, their standard details will tell you to treat it like pavement. So fundamentally it functions as impervious surface. But honestly, if the state has some specific, I might check their frequently asked questions if they have something on that. I don't know of it, Mike. And I think that's been left up to municipalities, and oftentimes the way it's constructed, it does function like impervious surface. It's green, but
most of them are colored green, but not all of them. Yeah, my understanding is it is impervious. The DEP's definition of impervious surface is basically a surface that would be resistant to water infiltration, which astroturf or these artificial fields are. I think I saw in that question, those little rubberized pellets. I honestly don't know if that comes off in a storm event. I know that is littered in my kids' shoes when they get off the field. So I can only imagine, at least a heavy enough rain event may take it. And you may want to do some pre-treatment before you do quantity and recharge, but I'm not 100% sure of that. That's just my best thought practice on that.
Just to fully confuse the question, I know in Princeton we are doing a new artificial turf field in one of our parks, and I just would be really surprised if there's not a way to build it that allows it to be pervious and have rainfall managed, you know, under the surface, because Princeton environmental activists would be squealing really loudly if we weren't doing that.
I know a lot of them will have drains either along the side of them, or I think I've seen one or two of them on the field, which I don't understand. But then that will go to an infiltration trench underneath the field. So there's a collection system that then goes under the field and infiltrates.
There's a question about required county review of the ordinances, and does that have to be completed by March 3rd of 2021, March 2nd?
Yes. So those ordinances have to be effective March 2nd, at the end of March 2nd, so I guess, 9 a.m. March 3rd, 2021. I've been meaning to go back and look whether it is the counties have to affirmatively do something, or whether it's just submitted and if the county objects, they have to do it. I don't honestly remember. Jen, do you remember or know? Or David?
I think it was, I think there was actually a resolution that was put on the county agenda regarding each municipality, but it was really, honestly, mostly perfunctory.
Okay.
There's also some questions about the reporting. So would the quarterly reports only be for major developers, or would it apply to minor projects as well?
So my recommendation is for all stormwater management systems to have that, because they all have to be maintained to function. And if you don't, I mean, one of the problems with many municipalities, they have no idea what's in their town, because some of these things are 20, 30, 40 years old. So if you don't have a system in place now to capture the new ones, you're going to lose them. Now, there's practicalities to that. So, our recommendation is to do it, but I understand there are practicalities, and if towns want to do major developments only, and then start to phase in minor developments as time goes on and people start to get comfortable with it, I think that makes sense. But the reason for the reporting is, if you have to report, you're more likely to go out and make sure the thing is functioning and being maintained than if you don't report and you don't have to fill out a form, or if you have to fill out a form every other year, or but these are our recommendations. As with the minor development, there's a range of what towns have done, and what makes sense for your town. Again, maybe phasing it in does make a lot of sense. Princeton has done, David, I think it's annual reporting.
Yeah, I think so. And I do just want to mention that even with the minor projects, in a way, we're almost more concerned about the minor, single family residences, because often these are developed, by a developer, sold to a property owner who may have no idea that there's a stormwater management BMP on their site. And so, we've talked about requiring, a deed restriction or other kinds of ways of transmitting that information to make sure that each successive property owner is aware. But having a reporting requirement is a great way to ensure that people are aware that these exist on these smaller properties.
So I think we want to be respectful of our panelists' time. There are so many questions. We have the emails will be included with the presentations, and we can include them in the follow-up so that specific questions can be answered. But maybe just one last question for you all. Most engineers create solutions that they feel are safe or proven, read liability resistant. What is the sense that these project engineers are comfortable with the safety of these new rules? Who is educating and easing their anxiety?
That's the question you want to end on. Everybody buckle up and get your pajamas.
I mean, I will say green infrastructure is newish to New Jersey. It's not new. Many states have done it. It is a new way of thinking. And so there is going to be an education component, which is why we are doing that certification course to get people to understand it and do it and install it and maintain it correctly. It's education, it's experience. Like I said, many states have done it. New Jersey is new to the game. And I think we'll get there. I don't know, Clay or David or Jen, you have other thoughts on that?
I would just add, I mean, I've heard a lot of that, the same, very similar comments, going back 15 years ago in Pennsylvania. A lot of the same discussions were had. And, engineering is a profession. People are engineers for life, and people don't like new things. And I always liken this to, it's a big barge or a ship. It will go where you want to, but it's not going to get there quickly, and it requires some momentum, and that's what this is. And so it's bringing relatively new ideas to a new table, if you will, and we just need that momentum going in the direction that it is. And as far as easing their anxiety, I'm not sure who they asked to accomplish that for them, but I think some time and experience will help.
I think that's a great point, Clay. And sorry, David. I just wanted to add that, I often say New Jersey is one of the 13 original colonies. And we've got, in some ways, a bad case of this is the way we've always done it. And so you will see that reoccur in stormwater management applications. And the more that the Watershed Institute can demonstrate the green infrastructure that they're doing at their facility, the more that you can point to the green infrastructure that's happening around the state through environmental commission projects and open space committee projects, the more we can show that this is possible, not only in New Jersey, but in places where it gets really cold and really snowy, like Minnesota and Wisconsin. And so we can demonstrate, no, this really is possible. I know it's new, I know it's uncomfortable, but we've got examples of where it's working. And there's more than a decade worth of examples in New Jersey now. So we can help with that if you get that kind of pushback. Sorry, David.
That's okay. I'm going to say, several of you have sort of said it is sort of new. I have to say I'm an old man, and I remember when I was still in architecture school, when I was a young man, I saw a presentation on an IBM campus in suburban, in Westchester County. That was a green infrastructure campus that was done by IBM at that time. The very first issue of Green Building News, which I subscribed to shortly after getting out of school, had a big article on green infrastructure. And by the way, one of the reasons why it made such an impact on me is that if you do this stuff right, it's actually less expensive than hard engineered stormwater management. So, it's not only better for the environment, but it actually can be cost savings if you plan from the start. So it's not new. It's been around.
Well, let me jump in and just thank again our presenters tonight. Let me pay a particular thank you to David for your great leadership in Princeton and the accomplishments that you've made there. It's been a joy to work with you and your colleagues. Clay, thank you for all the work that you're doing as a real leader in this effort. And Jen Coffey, thank you, and the good work of Anjek. You've been a great partner on this. And thanks to all of you who joined us tonight. We are here to help. And I know that I say that on behalf of the Watershed Institute and Anjek as well.
Absolutely.
So thank you. Please stay healthy out there. And we hope we'll see you again soon in one way or another. So thanks again.
Excellent. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
David, Clay,
Right.
thank you so much.
Take care. Have a good one.
Thanks. Good night.